A shadowy, crawling girl, with a grotesque ghost with a distorted face, and a bloodthirsty woman in red. Today, I'm going to show you the latest Indonesian horror film. It's said that it has scared people to death in theaters right after its release. Hurry and invite your brave friends to watch it. By the way, this ghost is a bit different, because it's a succubus. It specifically targets women whose husbands are not home, manipulating their minds until they can't resist. Helen is the target this time. She can feel the intimate contact from the succubus, and the pleasure is unprecedented, causing her to lose interest in her husband. Moreover, she sometimes behaves strangely, especially on rainy days. Helen took her red umbrella onto the street and seduced a taxi driver, allowing the succubus to successfully kill. There is a reason why Helen was targeted. Her husband is a Navy soldier, and he is often away from home. But today is the day her husband Kevin is back home on leave. Helen dresses beautifully to take her son to pick up Kevin. However, she has also prepared a divorce agreement. Her son Ian is shocked when he sees it. But what shocked him was why she had to pick up his father, even though she was preparing for a divorce. Helen simply says that adult matters aren't for children to understand. In fact, their family is in a decent situation, but the husband is often not home. Soon, they arrive at the port to pick up Kevin. That evening, the three of them went to watch a movie. After a long time apart, Kevin wants to touch his wife, but Helen directly brushes his hand away, showing a very poor attitude. Kevin becomes a bit angry at this. However, they can't argue in the cinema. After the movie, the three of them return home. At this time, their neighbor Tony noticed that Kevin is back, and chatted with him for a while. Late at night, after waiting for Ian to fall asleep, he begins to question his wife about why she has been going out at night recently. Clearly, Tony must have told him earlier. Thus, the two start to argue. Kevin suspects that his wife is having an affair. Helen certainly won't admit it. She simply says she no longer wants to be his servant. Kevin insists that this is a normal part of married life. That night, Kevin wanted to engage in some intimacy, but Helen said she was on her period. This statement killed Kevin's interest. However, he found no signs of her period in the bathroom, so he angrily confronted Helen again. Kevin tried to communicate with her nicely, but it seemed neither of them could manage that. Kevin was very angry. He stated that he had provided Helen with great material conditions to pursue her dream of being a writer. He asked if it was because he was often away from home that she was seeking other men. Helen refused to answer his questions. Instead, she emphasized that she had a lot to write, and that she had to work late tonight. After hearing this, Kevin declared that he would find the other man. Then he left angrily. Helen banged her head against the table, seeming to be in great distress. At this moment, Ian heard the noise and came out. He protected his mother's head and then hugged her. The next morning, Kevin was awakened by the sounds from the kitchen. It turned out to be Ian making breakfast by himself. Suddenly, someone rang the doorbell. He opened the door to find Helen's assistant Nita. She was there to take Ian to school. Then Nita told Kevin that Helen had rented a room at a hotel to work on her manuscript. But strangely, Helen had never taken her to the hotel. While they were talking, Nita suddenly walked towards Kevin. Just as Ian came out, Nita then stopped preparing to leave. Kevin suddenly grabbed her hand and wanted to know where the hotel was. Nita stated that only their boss Val knew. She added that he often went to the hotel to see Helen. Upon hearing this, Kevin felt something was wrong. Just as Nita left, Tony came over. He specifically told Kevin that he saw Helen leave alone early this morning, and that there was a dark figure following her. It felt like a ghost. Kevin thought he was talking about a man. Tony immediately denied it. Then he took Kevin to the bedroom window, stating that he had seen many times a figure outside watching Helen. It looked just like a ghost. Kevin thought it was Ian, but Tony's serious expression indicated that it must be a ghost. He didn't want to hear any more of this nonsense, so Kevin politely asked Tony to leave. At this moment, the long pillow on the bed suddenly turned around, revealing that there was indeed a ghost. However, neither of them saw the scene. Before leaving, Tony gave him a notebook, saying that it could help solve the issue with Helen. However, from that day on, his wife never returned. Kevin was very anxious. He searched everywhere for signs of his wife. Finally, Kevin found Val. Val told him not to disturb Helen, because she was finishing her manuscript. Then he hung up the phone. Kevin was somewhat angry, so he traced Val's location. Val saw him and seemed to think he was coming for him. He directly fled to a bar, and there he told Kevin that his wife was doing very well. Kevin immediately wanted to beat him up, but due to his military status, he ultimately didn't take action. After the other person left, he called another person over. It turned out, he had hired a private detective to help keep an eye on Val. After returning home, Mita came over. She directly hugged Kevin. At this moment, Ian wanted his father to help him bathe. Mita stepped aside to wait. Kevin asked his son what his mother usually did. Ian replied that his mother was very pitiable. Suddenly, some blood-red marks appeared on the ceiling. Ian signaled his father to be quiet. At this moment, Helen suddenly returned. Mita seemed very frightened upon seeing her. She left the place. Helen told Kevin that she had come back to bring some food. The two met and started arguing again. Ian hid in the corner. He suddenly saw the marks on the ceiling again, moving closer towards Helen. In the next moment, the power in the house went out, and Helen inexplicably vanished from sight. She only reappeared once the power was restored, but she collapsed on the floor. Kevin hurriedly carried his wife to the bed. After a while, he suddenly noticed something wrong in the mirror. When he looked closely, it returned to normal. Kevin thought he was just seeing things, so he turned off the lights and went to sleep. At midnight, Helen suddenly hugged that pillow, making some indescribable sounds. Kevin was awakened and turned on the light, throwing the pillow down. At this moment, the phone rang. It was the detective calling to report on the investigation. Val indeed often appeared near the hotel. After hearing this, Kevin concluded that the third party was Val. He went to the bathroom and started cursing. Kevin didn't notice that Helen had gotten up and left. When he realized and started looking for his wife, he couldn't find her anywhere, so Kevin prepared to go out and search near the hotel. However, he didn't notice that Helen was hanging upside down from the ceiling. Like Spider-Man, Kevin found the detective and got the key to Helen's room, so he planned to catch them in the act. At this moment, an old lady also entered the elevator. A bizarre scene unfolded. The old lady inexplicably disappeared in the elevator. Kevin was very confused, but now he was anxious to catch them in the act, and didn't think much about it. Kevin opened the room, and found that only Val was there, so he pointed his gun at him, and demanded to know where Helen was. Val picked up a stack of manuscripts, and began to read aloud. Kevin was furious and beat him up. Val passed out immediately. He has no choice but to go home. Kevin found that his son wasn't sleeping and seemed scared. He asked Ian what he was afraid of. His son said that Mom was in the bathroom. Kevin felt confused, but he still went to check the bathroom. Kevin discovered that Helen was lying in the bathtub, and she was covered in blood. The strangest thing was that the pillow had reappeared in her arms. Kevin could only carry her back to the bed. Then he went to check on his son, but Ian was trembling under the covers. Kevin asked if he knew what was wrong with Mom, and when she would come home. Ian covered his ears and said nothing. Kevin didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, it suddenly started to rain heavily outside. Helen stood by the window, looking outside. Suddenly, the door opened by itself, and she walked out. At this moment, a ghostly shadow appeared behind Helen. Then she walked down the street holding a red umbrella. Helen flagged down a taxi, but this driver was also a lecher. He addressed Helen as beautiful lady. The driver also uttered other vulgar remarks. He reached his hand towards the back seat. Seeing that she didn't react, he became excited. Suddenly, he saw a ghostly figure in the rearview mirror. He was so scared that he slammed on the brakes. However, it was too late. The ghost grabbed the driver's head and slammed it against the glass. Soon, the driver was lifeless. Helen got out of the car and began to dance in the rain. Then she walked towards the hotel. At this time, the detective was still guarding the hotel entrance. He directly followed her. Helen didn't take the elevator, but instead went to the side to climb the stairs, and she had already noticed the detective behind her. Helen quickly entered a room. The detective eavesdropped at the door. There was an indescribable sound coming from inside again. His ear got closer and closer to the door. At this moment, the door unexpectedly opened. Helen was standing in front of the mirror. The other party remained silent. She picked up a fruit knife and waved it in front of him. Then Helen continued her writing. The detective casually searched the room. Suddenly, he heard some noise coming from the wardrobe. He opened it but found nothing. At this moment, Helen suddenly sat on the bed and said that she knew he was sent by her husband. A ghost suddenly appeared from the wardrobe, and it was the same ghost as the one associated with Helen's pillow. The detective no longer has any reservations when exposed. Suddenly, there was a noise from the bathroom. The detective hurried over to check. He discovered a pool of blood on the floor, so he immediately drew his gun. The detective didn't expect Helen to be so ruthless. She directly stabbed his left eye out. Then she threw him onto the bed and stabbed him to death. then she used scissors to cut off his scalp. Meanwhile, Kevin was awakened by a liquid dripping on his face. He looked up to see red marks on the ceiling. At this point, Kevin had to believe that something unclean was present, so he sought help from his neighbor Tony. Tony suggested that someone envied their beautiful life, and had summoned an evil spirit to break them apart. He also said that his magic could help Kevin. Then he saw the marks on the ceiling as well. After Tony entered the bedroom, he picked up a strand of hair from the floor. Tony said Helen was controlled by some kind of curse. As for the source of the curse, that was for Kevin to find out. Soon, Kevin found a videotape. He watched and discovered it was Helen and her assistant Mita. Unexpectedly, Mita expressed that she was very fond of Kevin, and hoped to have him for one night. Helen naturally didn't agree, but Mita added that she could bring new excitement to Helen. That didn't belong to humans. Kevin felt confused. It turned out Mita wanted to destroy his family. On the other side, Helen was busy writing her manuscript. Val was thrilled to see her writing so well. He urged her to finish the ending. At this moment, Kevin drove downstairs. The lights in the room flickered. Then Val saw marks appearing on the ceiling. He was so frightened that he retreated to the balcony. Val fell off the balcony and landed on Kevin's car. Kevin was checking the detective's car when he saw someone fall onto the roof. To his surprise, it was Val. Kevin immediately grabbed his gun and rushed upstairs. While in the elevator, he saw the old lady again. He was curious why she kept saying she would come, but the old lady remained silent. Suddenly, the lights flickered. When they returned to normal, the old lady was gone again. Kevin stopped being curious. He arrived at Helen's room and found his wife had already collapsed on the floor. On his way back, he didn't want to take the elevator, so Kevin carried her down the stairs to the car. He backed up the car and tossed Val's body out. Then they returned home. Helen quickly regained consciousness, but she was very resistant to Kevin's affection. It seemed the curse had not been lifted. Kevin could only call Tony for help. Tony asked him to decorate the room according to the requirements. Soon, Tony arrived and began to recite a spell. Suddenly, another Helen in the mirror spoke. "There are no demons here. The demons are in everyone's heart." Then Helen began to float. At this moment, someone knocked on the door. Tony told Kevin to open the door, and emphasized not to let outsiders know about it. Kevin opened the door to find Mita bringing Ian home, so he instructed Ian to return to his room. At this moment, Mita noticed something was wrong. She turned and ran in fear, but Kevin quickly grabbed her back, because he believed Mita was the root of the whole matter. As he spoke, Kevin began to get physical with her. Unexpectedly, the pillow ghost appeared and possessed Mita. She bolted out. Then Mita began to perform strange actions on the street. Meanwhile, Tony had always had inappropriate thoughts about Helen. Now that he had the chance, he naturally wouldn't let it slip away. But before he could do anything, Kevin returned. Tony pulled him down. Then they started fighting. Suddenly, Helen floated up again, and all the candles in the room went out. When Kevin lit the candles, he discovered Helen was already gone, and the pillow ghost reappeared, possessing Tony. He began to perform eerie movements and walked out. At the same time, the door was closed. At this moment, Mita was acting crazy on the street, and Kevin found a gun. The door opened at this moment. Kevin walked out and found Tony kneeling on the ground. He grabbed his head and slammed it against the cabinet. After that, more marks appeared on the ceiling. Then Helen's voice came from the bedroom. Kevin walked in to take a look. The pillow ghost was holding Helen. Suddenly, Kevin fainted. When he woke up again, he found himself tied up in a theater, and around him were many people who had already perished. Helen was speaking to herself in front of him. Then she shot Kevin dead. The film ended there. There was only one ghost in the entire film, but everyone has their own inner demons. None of the men in the film were good. They all treated Helen as a tool for venting their desires. In the end, this led to the pillow ghost appearing to enact punishment. The script is a relatively rare type, but the execution of it wasn't very good. The ending was also somewhat inexplicable. It feels like Kevin, while at fault, shouldn't have led Helen to kill him. Moreover, she didn't seem to be possessed at that moment. Perhaps the director wanted to create a unique effect, but ended up not knowing what he really wanted to express. I wouldn't recommend watching the original film. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe to my channel. Your support is the greatest encouragement to me.